So that is a policy that has actually really impacted the way that we do education today. Um, so next up, in 1992, Australia had the Disability Discrimination Act. Now, this act actually said that it was unlawful to discriminate against a person on the basis of their disability. So, if you're in the undergraduate class, you actually need to talk about this act in your second essay. Disability is defined broadly in the Act to cover physical disability, intellectual disability, mental illness, disease states, hearing impairment, vision impairment, acquiring a brain injury, developmental disabilities, or learning disabilities. Um, Basically, the Australian government is saying that every child with a disability has the right to the same educational opportunities as other children. This is reflected in the Disability Discrimination Act. Now, once again, we have to consider this concept of the least restrictive environment because while every child has the right to the same educational opportunities, it may not be in the child's best interests to be in a mainstream classroom 100% of the time. It might be in the child's best interests to go to a special needs school. So notice the wording here is that it is the right of the child with a disability to have the same educational opportunity. So every child with a disability should have an opportunity to access the regular curriculum. So what you might see often in schools is that children with disabilities might start in a mainstream school because they have a right to try a mainstream school. But after a few years, it might become obvious that they need a special school. So this is something that we also need to consider, that they actually have the right to the opportunity to accessing the general curriculum. The same goes in special schools when it comes to life skills. Some schools are keen to try to put kids on life skills straight away, but the reality is that every child actually has a right to the regular curriculum. So we have to give students the opportunity to access that curriculum before we make the decision that it is in their best interest to do something like life skills, um, so that they can get what they need. And once again, there are going to be students where doing the mainstream curriculum does not make sense. There are going to be students who will not be able to learn how to read. There will be students who will struggle with counting. And so we bring in what is called life skills, where we try to teach them the skills that they need to be the most productive in society as possible. So, life skills might be teaching really basic reading skills instead of teaching them how to write an essay. And we have to consider the Disability Discrimination Act when we make those kinds of decisions. When we're teaching a student, we have to decide, is this in the best interest of the student? Have we exhausted every have we exhausted every opportunity for this student to access the regular curriculum? All state and territory education providers, including government and non-government schools, must comply with the Disability Discrimination Act. The DDA covers people who have temporary and permanent disabilities, and it also covers anti-discrimination laws. The DDA says that in some circumstances, treating someone differently because of their disability isn't against the law. This is known as an exemption. So, this is what I was talking about earlier. It's not against the law to make the decision that a child needs to go onto life skills. What you have to do is you have to collaborate with the parent. You can't just do it yourself. You have to talk to the parent, and you need to exhaust every other option. It isn't against the law to give a child a different program because that's what they need. What is against the law is to just say, oh, this child has autism, I'm just going to give them life skills. They actually have the right to access the normal curriculum in the least restrictive environment. Okay, so I'm just going to play this video, which I think is going to explain it better than I will.
What Disability Justice Australia presents. What is disability discrimination in Australia? An introduction. Hi, I'm going to tell you about disability discrimination. By the end of this video, you will know what counts as a disability that can be discriminated against, places where discrimination can happen, and how disability discrimination can happen. It is against the law for someone to discriminate against you because of a disability you have now or a disability that they think you have. It is also against the law for someone to discriminate against you for a disability you had in the past, for example, during a period of mental illness, or a disability you might get in the future because of your family history. The laws are for people who have any type of disability. This includes disabilities that are physical or sensory, an intellectual or learning disability, a work-related injury, or a medical condition. This medical condition could be physical or mental health related. Discrimination can happen in all kinds of places and ways. By law, discrimination can happen anywhere outside your home. It can happen at work and in the job recruitment process, at sports, community and social clubs, at school, universities, TAFE and private colleges where they are providing you education or assessing your application to study there, at shops, cinemas, theatres, cafes and restaurants, at swimming pools, libraries, parks and on the streets. It can happen when you try to use trams, trains and bus services, taxis and drivers, airplane services, government programs. It can happen when you are applying for a place to live or stay, buying property, applying for a government program. Now you know some of the places discrimination can happen. How can you tell you have been discriminated against? There are two kinds of discrimination, direct and indirect. Let's talk about both. Direct discrimination is when someone refuses you access to goods, services, or premises, or refuse you a job because of your disability. This happened to Sarah. Sarah has a hearing aid. Sarah applied for a job to work at a clothes shop and was able to do all the work required of staff at the clothes shop. The boss told Sarah he does not employ people with disabilities because he does not think they can do a good job and it is too much trouble. This was disability discrimination because he decided not to give her the job because of her disability, not because she wasn't able to do the job. Another example of direct discrimination is what happened to Leo when he called a taxi to take him to a concert. Leo has a seeing eye dog, and the taxi driver wouldn't take Leo to the concert because he said he had a rule for everyone that no dogs can come into his car. This was disability discrimination because having the dog is a part of Leo's disability, and the taxi driver's rule meant he couldn't use a service when people without his disability can. Leo missed out on the concert. The taxi driver should have changed his rule for Leo. Another example of treating people differently and badly because of their disability is if people try to charge you more to receive a service because of your disability. For example, if a taxi or airplane tried to charge you more for helping with your disability requirements. Indirect discrimination is when goods or services or access to the premise are designed only for people without disabilities and you cannot use it. This happened to Jack. Jack was in a wheelchair and wanted to go into the bookstore to buy a book for his mum for her birthday. The shop he wanted to go into had shelves blocking the entrance, and Jack could not move into or around it. Jack couldn't buy his mum the present he wanted to get her. The shop should have arranged the furniture so that people with disability could enter and move around inside the shop. Another example of indirect discrimination is what happened to Jack at school. Jack asked his school to build a ramp at the entrance of the school and schedule his timetable so all his classes could be on the first floor of the school. He was in year 11 and it would be very stressful to change schools. The school refused to make these adjustments for him and said he would be better off in a special school. This was disability discrimination. The law says that people and places must make changes to treat you fairly. Sometimes it might be hard or cost too much for people to make changes for you, but they have to prove it is too hard to make changes to get out of a charge of disability discrimination. You should also know that carers and parents of people with disability can also suffer disability discrimination. Your carers and parents can ask to have flexible work arrangements so they can assist you. If their boss says no, that could be disability discrimination and is against the law in Australia. They could also suffer disability discrimination if they cannot go to an event with you because you cannot get access because of your disability. This happened to John. John won an award and wanted his mum to see him receive the award. His mum uses a wheelchair and the building was not accessible to wheelchairs. Both John and his mum are discriminated against because of our disability. That ends our introduction to disability discrimination law in Australia. Remember, there are no inspectors checking if people are complying with the laws against disability discrimination, so it's up to you to report discrimination when it happens to you. The Australian state and territory governments decided this discrimination is not okay and is illegal. They have set up laws and human rights commissions that help you make and lodge a complaint and have it dealt with. If direct or indirect discrimination has happened to you and you would like to tell us, Disability Justice Australia can help you to make a complaint or refer you to another service if we cannot help you.
Okay, so just going to get to the next bit. All right. So after the Disability Discrimination Act